So, I think we can start. Welcome everyone to this live science talk. We have the pleasure to have here Jukka Relander. The topic of today is UN 2030 Agenda, Sustainable Development Goals, a call to action. We have a small audience, very qualified, I would say. Half of the audience is composed by panel members, I would say. No, I'm exaggerating a bit, but not so far from reality. So, Jukka Relander, you are president of EBLIDA.
Yes.
And still chairman of the Finnish Library Association.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all. I leave you the floor.
Thank you very much, Tulia. Yes, and EBLIDA is, and I have to say, confess that I was president of that organization for 3 months before I learned to say the name. It's European Bureau of Library Information and Documentation Associations, which is pretty much the network of European library associations, and it was originally founded in order to do the lobbying in Brussels. Because, as we know, in European Union countries, about half of our laws come from Brussels, so the libraries have to be presented there as well. Our problem is that, if we look at our organization, we have 1.5 employees, and when we are talking about, for example, copyright reform, the counterpart, the publishers, they have 15 lawyers. So we have to work hard. But we're not talking about European lobbying here. That's the purpose and raison d'etre for our organization. But we're talking about UN 2030 agenda. And I shall not go through the whole agenda here. But I'm thinking about the agenda in terms of, libraries, from the library point of view to the agenda, what's relevant to the libraries. And the second question I will raise immediately is that, is the Sustainable Development Goals, are they for the developing countries or are they for all of us? I mean, when we talk about development goals, we think of Africa, we think of South America, we think of areas with difficulties in development. But actually, when you go through the agenda, you find a lot which is relevant to each one of our countries. So my answer is yes, of course they are for developing countries who are facing bigger challenges than the rest of us. But on the other hand, our countries have a lot to improve, and I shall go into that. And I have an example for you, which is my own country. Comes naturally. It's sort of easy to pick up. And probably a country you know very little about, because it's far north and it's very small, except geographically. So, let me introduce you Finland in a nutshell. It is a developed democracy, and it's a lot of forests, lots of lakes, lots of space, and very little people. But those areas which are developed, they are very, very developed. So the question I shall discuss here is that what's there for us in these development goals. But I give you some facts first, which show that things are pretty well in Finland. So we have high average income. We have relatively equal and very peaceful society. We have the world's highest literacy percentage, lowest infant mortality rate, second longest maternal leaves after Sweden. We have top-rated schools, a free education from nursery to universities, highest freedom of speech level in the world, least corrupted administration, and highest density of heavy metal bands in the world. Barack Obama said that maybe there is a connection when he heard that. And we have the most visited libraries in the world. That's 20 loans per citizen, including everybody. So that's quite a lot. And then we have a very bad national football team, which is actually the 6th best in Scandinavia at the moment, after Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and Fair Islands, which is a small archipelago, having an own national team, and almost every second citizen of that country is a member of that team, because the population is very small, but they are better than we are. And the temperature in Helsinki is very seldom more than 20 degrees below the freezing point, so it is sometimes a livable place. The question is, what do we do with the agenda then? Because things are pretty good. Things are well. And being here in Switzerland, we might as well ask, what does Switzerland do with the agenda? I mean, things are even better here. The country is based on a big pile of gold. Other Norway, they're floating in oil, which they are selling to other countries. My claim is that we do a lot. And some of the work has started already. But there are some misunderstandings. I think if I think of Finnish civil servants, how they approach the agenda, they are thinking it in terms of development help to the third world. That's what they're doing. Those in charge of the agenda and implementation of the agenda, they work at the development sector of the Foreign Office, which is the place where we are dealing with our partnership, development partnership with Tanzania, which is our long-time partner, with Namibia, which is actually doing so well nowadays that it's dropping out from the development help system. And Nicaragua, we have a lot of cooperation with Nicaragua too. So these people are dealing with the agenda. And they are facing problems because the government is cutting the development budget down. We have the national populists in the government, and this is one of their achievements, or what they celebrate as their achievement. There's been a lot of discussion about this, of course. And there are organizations which work with the development aid, and they do everything they can to argue that more is needed. And they are very alert because their funding is being cut. But everything which is, all the work done with the agenda is basically done by these organizations or the development departments of the Foreign Office. So we are very little reflecting what should we do to Finland, as the other European countries as well are very little reflecting how should we react, how should we develop our own societies to meet the development goals, which are very ambitious. I mean, thinking of in terms of the whole planet, they are very ambitious. And it's a wonderful thing we have them. The big question is, how should we approach it? We have been talking about this in the Finnish Library Association, and we have been sort of trying to convert these ideas of the development goals to development challenges to our own society, and of course from the library point of view. So what we have been doing, we argue, for example, that employment can be supported by libraries. And the fact is that 4 million Europeans are using library computers to get a better job. So libraries provide very important network. I mean, my sort of slogan for libraries has been that it's a human interface of our civilization, but it's also a human interface of the information society, and where people with less developed IT skills can do something with assistance. There are lots of libraries providing help, assistance, also for refugees. I actually spent not last week, but a week before that, I spent in Australia, and they wanted to hear about how European libraries are dealing with the refugees. And I was quite proud when I finally got the listing from different countries what people have been doing. There were tremendous amounts of actions, and people were supporting language skills, the literacy skills, how to deal with different civil service, how to deal with bureaucracy, how to apply for something, how to maybe get a job and so forth, different kinds of social programs and so forth. But actually, while libraries are good in dealing with the refugee issue, is that actually those are the same things which libraries are doing anyway. for our own people. And particularly for that people who are not on the top of the development of their IT skills, who are marginalized in terms of the skills required in the information society, or not even marginalized, but who are a few steps behind. And I think that's a very important thing, because there's an increasing amount of people who are dropped out, who have been dropped out, who are not included in the sort of in the race, who are not really a part of the information society, who don't have the basic skills. And I think libraries provide a nice network to support those skills. No matter if you're a citizen and born in your own country, or if you have moved from elsewhere for a reason or another. And that's a development goal, number 4. Ensure inclusive and equitable and quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Well, lifelong learning, I mean, sometimes I feel irritated when I hear lifelong learning, as if there was somewhere an authority demanding me to change all the time. I mean, I'm good as I am. But on the other hand, the world is changing so fast, we need to adopt new skills, and that's part of being included in the society at the moment, that you adapt to new things. And that's something we need to think in the society as a whole, but that's of course one of the strengths of the libraries, which provide wonderful existing network. I mean, think, in Europe we have 70,000 libraries. We are reaching people wonderfully well. Okay, there are different numbers in different countries. Actually, we can divide Europe in 3 different library zones based on what kind of library networks we have, and what kind of library concept we have. We have the Catholic Europe, where the library is basically and fundamentally a collection. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I feel it is a sacred collection of treasures of the past and present. Whereas in Lutheran Europe we have a very everyday approach to library. They are consumable things we borrow from the library. Everyday books. I mean, you can borrow lots of detective stories in Finnish libraries, and people do that. Actually, in Lutheran Europe we have higher library usage because of longer tradition of literacy. I mean, in Scandinavia you could not get married if you didn't know how to read in the 16th century onwards. That was a precondition. You had to know how to read to get married. Full stop. So people kind of started knowing how to read. There's a very good, effective incentive. And then we have the post-socialist Europe. And I mean, spontaneously, you might think they're behind in development, library development. But it's, in a way, it's the other way around. They have huge library networks. In Bulgaria, there are 4,000 libraries. In Latvia, they have same amount of libraries as we have in Finland. They're 1/5 of the population, or 1/4. In Estonia, they have 550 libraries for 1.5 million of people. We have 750 for 5.5 million people. And because libraries used to be a very important part of the socialist or the communist propaganda network. So, I mean, it wasn't very much about information. You needed to have the book which is telling you how to become a good little pioneer. And you got that from the library. So libraries were used in that. But on the other hand, they were cultivating the treasure and giving it as a heritage to the post-socialist Europe. So they have lots of libraries. Okay, there are very many, very small libraries. But on the other hand, libraries are very present in the communities where people actually do live. And they have been, in different countries, in different ways, they have been developing their libraries. And for example, Baltic libraries are very modernized nowadays. still some quite backward, smallish libraries remain, but on the other hand, maybe they have their place. And that's how people like them. So that's an interesting area in terms of libraries. Okay, it's interesting in many other ways too, but we're not into that now. So, if we take a bit closer look to this goal number 4, ensure inclusive and quality education for all and promote lifelong learning. This is a quote also, that basic literary skills have improved tremendously, yet bolder efforts are needed to make even greater strides for achieving universal education goals. And I shall return to this question of literacy a bit later. I mean, this is the global perspective. Literacy has gone up very much. But there are some backlashes. Like Finnish Library Association is doing a development project together with Tanzania libraries. And they had very effective way of teaching people how to read during the socialist era of Julius Nyerere. But because they don't have the supporting network to keep up the literacy, it's been declining. Now it used to be 90%, now it's down to 60%. It's a country with 40 million of people with 36 libraries. So to reach the North European library density, they would need 11,000 libraries more. That's a challenge. But okay, those libraries work. And they do wonderful things there with very, very small resources. My personal experience is that one resource I might have needed when I was giving a speech in National Library of Dar es Salaam, of Tanzania in Dar es Salaam, the air condition would have been nice. Because that week they did not have electricity in that city, so there was no air condition. And it was 37 and the humidity was very, very high. The other challenge was that we were supposed to teach how to use computers. Laptops, but the laptops did not have batteries and there was no electricity, so we kind of approached that very theoretical, from a theoretical point of view. But everybody was very happy and we had a good time. And I hope it was useful after all. Okay, then we have this. Goal number 16. Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. Well, that's pretty much on the level of administration. But if we go further, paragraph 16.10. Ensure public access to information to protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation and international agreements. So this access to information, that's actually a very crucial global issue. I mean, there's a digital divide. Thinking of sub-Saharan Africa, this may be a few years old figure that about 5% of people in sub-Saharan Africa had access to internet a few years back. I don't think that has dramatically risen. Even greater issue is this. The amount of information produced. I mean, the information production is very unequal in the world. 0.7% of the information in the world is produced in sub-Saharan Africa, and 60% of that amount is produced in South African Republic. So there's no information production. On the other hand, here in Europe, we're struggling with the same issue from very different perspective. And now I come to what we're doing, what we're lobbying in Brussels. There's this kind of game going on called European copyright reform. And there's a battle of the ownership of the information going on. Who owns the information? And my conclusion, based on discussions both with IPA, International Publishers Association, and the European subsection FEP, Federation of European Publishers, is that the publishers want to own the information. And that's a big question for libraries. I mean, they think they're fighting against Google or Amazon, who, of course, want to establish global platforms to monopolize the information for themselves. And the counteraction is to establish another kind of monopoly of the information. At the moment, it seems that libraries are not getting a copyright exception in this copyright reform. And every single loan in libraries is based on that. It's based on copyright exception. In Brazil, there is no copyright exception, which means that you are not allowed to export a book from a library. You're supposed to read it inside, because otherwise it's a copyright violation. So if we're thinking the digital world, the copyright exception is needed so that actually public institutions are able to own information. And one library lawyer told me just a few weeks back that there's a sort of new concept of owning the information coming up in these discussions, because copyright has been protecting mostly the form of the information. I mean, it's a book as a whole which has been protected, but you may quote it, of course. But if the information as such is owned, that starts looking quite different. And these same issues come back also with the text and data mining directive, which the academic libraries are struggling with. They're very concerned about do the academic institutions and the researchers at the academic institutions have right to text and data mining, because that's a way of doing research in contemporary world. And the funny thing is that if this is legislated sort of favoring the publishers, actually the only operative who's really able to do text and data mining is Google, contrary to the intentions of the publishers. And as a European citizen, I'm very concerned about this, because the whole point of the copyright reform is to abolish the borders. I mean, there's a Schengen area for people. Money certainly is transferred easily from a country to another, as goods are, but at the moment information is not. And that would be the easiest to transport. I mean, it's in the internet. But I can't watch Finnish television here because it's copyright protected. It is not shown in my... and same goes with countless other forms of information. So, I mean, I know Switzerland is not voting in Brussels. Okay, nobody tweets here, but spread the word. This is an important thing. We need to be aware. And it will radically influence the operations of libraries in the near future the more the material gets digitalized. So this is my call to action. But now I return to the agenda. I mean, this is a reflection of the agenda. And this is one of my main questions here. Do we read it? Do we read the agenda as a guideline when helping others, or as something we can try to reach ourselves? And I think there are plenty of things pointing to the direction that we should react as societies, as library people, to the challenges posed by the agenda. So my point is that it should be both. We have challenges as every other country has. And we can't afford neglecting them. And this is the biggest one. Oh, sorry. This is the biggest one of them. Illiteracy is going up. It's I just saw a study that 20% of the citizens of the European Union are practically illiterate at the moment. In the most basic sense of the word, meaning that you can't read a whole sentence reaching its end remembering how it began. There are different forms of illiteracies. I shall come to them a bit later. But this even this basic illiteracy is coming up in two different areas. I mean, of course, we have lots of immigrants and refugees from countries where literacy percentage is rather low. As it is, for example, in Afghanistan. There were two waves of Somalians coming to Finland in the 90s. The first wave, as it always is when there's a crisis in a country, first the educated middle class escapes because it's easier for them. And when the country situation gets desperate, then other people start coming. So the first wave we had literate people with some foreign language skills, and then we had in second wave we had illiterate countrysiders. And for them to adjust to new society is of course a bigger challenge, because the whole idea of working with symbols is alien. So there's a lot of work still to be done. And then there's the other area where illiteracy is growing, and that's the rusty belts of different countries, where there's declining industry, where there's a lot of unemployment, where there's kind of vicious circle passing from a generation to another of despair. So in those areas we find more and more illiterate people, particularly the boys, actually, in many countries. Okay, but there are other forms of illiteracy, or other forms of literacy, which we should pay attention to. One of them is media literacy, which is that you actually are able to kind of understand the context of the text you're reading, maybe see its intentions. Sometimes it is dressed as information literacy. And then I'm kind of fond of this transliteracy, which I heard from a Sorbonne professor where she was lecturing at the EBLIDA conference in Riga. And she used the word transliteracy to describe ability to read a text, to understand its context, to realize its interests and intentions, and to use it in another context. Actually, when you're linking things in Facebook, you're using transliteracy. And that skill, so that there's full comprehension, is possessed by 50% of Europeans, one half. And the lack in skills in literacy does have consequences, as we know. I mean, strange things are happening. And I think these are problems of media literacy. The basic ability to tell a truth from a lie, for example. As I said earlier, libraries are the only existing network supporting literacy. So that's our work, to improve and develop people's literacy skills in all the levels of literacy. In the most basic level, the fundamental ability to read one sentence, to more advanced skills which are needed to be a fully competent member of the society. Because to be a fully competent member of the society, you need the skills of the information society. Because that's where we live. That's where the world is. So that's the modern definition, which is now used quite commonly, which is an extended definition of literacy, which we should use. But I think we still have to remember that there are people who are not literate in the most basic sense of the word, and that amount of that people is growing up, and we need to react. Maybe people should not get permission to get married before they know how to read. It worked before. Yeah. So in the modern sense of the term, we have a high illiteracy. And this is a crucial question in regard to employment, political stability, and social sense of belonging. Because if you're excluded from the information society, you are excluded from a very big area of the society. I mean, think about the amount of time we spend in Facebook. And how important community is that? How important source of information? How important arena for political debate? How important elements of belonging? And not only Facebook, of course, but the whole social media as a whole, which is owned and dominated by a few private companies, which is, of course, a huge problem. So the question is, what should we do, really? We must rethink the agenda. It's written for the whole planet. And we have to go through the agenda in each one of our own countries and think in which areas we have to improve to meet the goals. I mean, of course, it is very important that we give more money to poor civil servants in the Foreign Office who are in charge of development help programs. All the third sector organizations who are doing a wonderful job in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South America, in Northern England. So, okay, I have a slide about e-books which I went through already, but this is the question I want to raise in the end. And that's one of the challenges we are facing. If we think that libraries should have quite a big role in helping people to adapt the skills required in the information society, it will be difficult if they don't own the material. A decisive vote will be in jury committee in March, so I ask you to call your friends, spread the word, alarm citizens. I mean, it's quite crucial in terms of being able to do the basic job of the libraries. So thank you. I'm open to questions.
Any questions? Comments, questions?
Would anybody like to sing something? Or?
I think before we, since there are nobody is jumping up to ask any questions, maybe we can go ahead and bring the panel up to the podium, start the discussion there, and then hopefully that will inspire discussion with the rest of the participants in the room.
Yep.
If you're more comfortable sitting here, it's up to you.
We could bring him
In
here. But if you want, I mean, just...
It's really up to you.
How many of us are?
4.
Or more.
I'm the moderator. I
Well,
can sit at the front. You can stay.
Which means that if we bring 4 there, we let more people out there. Exactly.
I'll sit at the front since I'm the moderator. I can.
Okay.
I think we can remain here where we are. Remain
So
seated.
if we convert panel into open discussion,
Yeah.
and those who are nominated to panel have a special duty to be clever.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Translator it.
Yes.
you could just turn your microphone off for a minute so I can. Is mine working? Okay. Brief introduction. I'm Bree Grenoble. I'm the Digital Collections Librarian at ITU, and I'll be moderating the panel. Thank you for everyone who did come to this library science talk. We have three panelists today. Francesco Pisano, the Director of UN Library Geneva. Ian Roberts, Coordinator of Library and Information Networks for Knowledge at the World Health Organization. And Tullio Bisaglia, the Library Section Leader of CERN's Scientific Information Service. And he's here today representing BIS and SAB concerning the implementation of the UN Agenda 2030 in Switzerland. And then, of course, Jukka Relander, our presenter. I wanted to just start by quickly saying something and then allowing each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and then we can move on with the discussion. But as Jukka said, one of the things we do as libraries is help our user communities access information, and providing access to information is such an integral part of achieving the UN 2030 agenda. And I think we really have the skills and also in a lot of ways the resources to enable that to happen. So one of the reasons we invited Francesco and Ian to participate in the panel is that both UNOG and WHO have really have launched some fantastic initiatives, and I think really visible initiatives that make the connection between the work they're doing in their libraries and the SDGs. So maybe if Francesco, you could start, and then Ian follow up with a brief introduction.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me here, and together with me, the people that work with me who are back at the library, except one is here with me, continue this work. As a way of introduction, I think the way we look at Agenda 2030 is certainly a roadmap to changing the world. I don't think we will have many other chances changing the world before the world kicks us out of the planet in a way. So, and I truly believe that this is possibly the one single most important moment of the UN as an agent of multilateralism in the history of the UN. I don't see any other product of the UN apart from the Charter that has the same potential impact of Agenda 2030. So for me, it's very clear that Agenda 2030 is a call for action to every single citizen on the planet. I don't think it is for the poor. I don't think that there is any longer any underdeveloped country. I think that there are countries that are less ready access to what we consider today strategic infrastructures or strategic signs of development, like owning a car, which is quite antiquated if you think about it from 50 years from now. We actually use that. The other antiquated indicator that we use is financial growth, or GDP. I can assure you that in 70 years it will make people in university laugh. So for us, it's very clear that there is a nexus that is deeper than what we read in the goals, and the nexus, in my opinion, is located at the level of targets. The 169 targets that underpin and link the 17 SDGs are really the matrix to start this transformative progressive action. And I say often to my students at university, if you can conceive of a world where everyone has access to health, and everyone is no poor, then you have all the other 17 things coming along in a different way. So if no one is poor, then your notion of decent job of 2015 will be changed forever, and so on and so forth. So why I'm saying this? Because it's the 169 indicators that we have to look at, and those require knowledge. And in the libraries, we store that knowledge. And in the libraries circuit of the UN, we store a lot of very relevant knowledge, which is on the key global indicators. So you can't save the oceans only from the shores of those who've got more money. You need both shores to save an ocean. So all of a sudden, it becomes quite irrelevant who's got the money. What becomes relevant is who's got access to what part of that knowledge required to save the oceans. And this is, for me, right there in your face, why the SDGs are so relevant for libraries and libraries so relevant for the SDGs. So one of the first things we have done together, we have taken all of our knowledge base, which goes beyond, of course, what we have in store, which is a tiny 1.7 million books. And we subdivided that knowledge base SDG by SDG. So we have produced a very basic initial resource guide where you can go SDG by SDG. It's very primitive, but it already acts like a guide, like what research guides to be for this initial step. Let's not forget that adopting in 15 means that we are just a year and a half into this humongous strategy, which is very big when you look from close. It's just the beginning. I think we will have a much better picture when we are midway. This is just as a way of introduction. And I was very interested in the first linkages between SDG 4, for instance, and libraries, and there are many other SDGs that relate to libraries. I think these are good ideas to start a deeper exploration. We should start from those. I like, and I would really love to firmly believe and share that belief that we are the only network that really care for world literacy. I think it's very important. And in a way, it doesn't really matter whether it's physical or digital. I think the moment of libraries, at least the libraries of the UN, is really now with respect to Agenda 2030. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yes, it's true that we are very powerful networks, and just to give you a little bit of context, the WHO library works with a team here in Geneva of 13 people, but also we work with teams across our regional offices. We have 6 of them divided across the world, and 150 country offices. So we are a very tight network of information specialists and librarians that can work on the issues that I'll be talking about here today. At the same time, we're very fortunate because with this amount of people across the world in our offices, we have a great outreach and leverage with proximity to the countries we're trying to serve. I think one of the questions or one of the points you raised today, Jukka, is the SDG 2030 agenda for the others or for ourselves? And you mentioned it's for both. But the real question behind that is, how do you go about it when it's for everybody? Do you act differently when it is for low and middle income countries or poor countries than you would in a high income country? Or do you go about your work in the same way to empower them? And so what we are trying to do in WHO, what we are doing actually, is we know, of course, that knowledge empowers. And it is knowledge that would help any country reach the Sustainable Development Goals. But there are still many barriers. So we have 4 strategic priorities. The first is to make sure that everything produced by WHO with the eagle-eye perspective on public health is available to all in our digital library in any language it's available, more than 70, across the world for free. The second strategic priority is to break the barriers of cost that are one of the main barriers to access to knowledge nowadays. If you take, for instance, the cost of online journals, the British Medical Journal, the Lancet, Nature, Science, there are countries that cannot even afford the print copy nor the online copy. And therefore we have a public-private partnership that we pioneered many years ago that allows us to that allowed publishers to provide free access or for very, very low cost to this mass of academic and professional information to more than 115 poor countries. I'll tell you more about that later on how that responds to SDGs. Then the third strategic priority is to give more visibility to local health information, local produced research, and by that we mean in low and middle income countries. In poor countries there is a lot of research being carried out. There is a lot of scientific publishing going on, but at levels of quality that are not quite the ones that meet the requirement of international platforms that will make that local literature visible. And we believe to have a full empowered perspective on how to go about the SDGs, we need to make that local information visible to the whole world. That's what we do with our Thread strategy, which is providing all that through WHO's international platforms so that this literature is visible to all. And finally, we have, of course, in-depth research, as well as a rapid response for information services like any traditional library. We also have online training, and that online training that is decentralized can be recorded, can be customized, and can be followed by anyone across the world. So we don't give training only to our staff to empower them with the latest scientific information to increase the credibility of our output and our organization's aura. It can be used by anyone at the same time to increase this literacy, most certainly in health. So all of this, we believe, does respond to helping countries reach SDGs. And I can give a few examples of two more specific elements in that that we're working on right now.
Okay, Tullio, do you want to...
Well, maybe I could later on say a few words about what the president of BIS asked me to say concerning Switzerland. What I could, since you talked about your experience in your organizations, I could say a few words about some. Maybe Jens can also complement, but I think that already the fact that in the DNA of the organization there is this concept of free availability of the scientific results, the scientific output of the organization, which was written in the Constitution of 1953, which is still, so to say, the base of our daily activity. And it's something that, so to say, goes in this direction, very early, so to say, and quite innovative for the time when it was countersigned by the member countries. Today, what we are working on is mainly on further developing the project that we launched that started in 2014, actually, with implementation, which is the Scope 3 Consortium, which is a very ambitious project, which consists in making a considerable amount of knowledge in particle physics freely available, which is far from, so to say, a perfect, should I say, project or of achievement. There are still many concerns about the sustainability from our point of view, the point of view of the organization and of the participants in this consortium. But I think it goes in the right direction in providing free access to anyone on the planet to information, high quality information in particle physics. But it's not only that, also one of the key development axes of CERN, which is the education, continuous education for teachers, for example, education for students, for technicians, especially for young scientists, etc., goes in the direction that was mentioned before. And that is something that is very important for the organization, as important as the high quality of research that is produced. Because we think that is something that is, so to say, belongs to the raison d'etre of the organization, and which goes beyond of the fact that we are an European organization, so we mainly have European stakeholders, because as a matter of fact, we are already in a worldwide organization, because we have a memorandum of understanding with many more countries beyond the European countries. So that's what I wanted to say.
Are there any questions from the audience, from the non-panelists? Okay. One of the things that I kept thinking about, and I think what the examples that Ian gave of what WHO has been doing And as Jukka was presenting, I really kept coming back to the idea of information literacy and media literacy, and it's one thing to provide the access to the information, which I think we all do quite well, but then providing assistance and training on showing people how to find and evaluate the type of information that we do provide, and the training that WHO offers, is that tied into that as well, or a sort of, I would say information literacy, assistance with evaluating good resources versus not so good resources. There's so much information available now. I find it challenging in my own life to find what I really need, and that raises another point. So there's sort of two questions. We can go in two directions. We make our resources available, but how do we make them findable? Are people finding and using the resource or research guide? When I saw the announcement about the WHO's SDG newsletter, I signed up right away. That came to me through the SwissLib mailing list. It's a very specific audience. I don't know if I'm the audience that you're necessarily trying to reach. So maybe we can start with the information literacy and then go in the direction of findability and reaching our audiences.
I think the question was addressed to me, to WHO, but it's also very valuable for everybody. And there's many questions behind what you've said there on discoverability and who do we respond to and how. Let me start by saying what WHO has done is really take a bold stride and quite a polite, provocative one. We have assumed that print is dead. And I'm being extremely provocative on purpose here, mostly in a fora where there's information specialists and librarians. But to us, our energies and the cost associated to having people working on this has to be directed where there's the most return on investment and that can serve the biggest or largest audience possible. And we know that print doesn't do that. We have to serve people in Ghana, in Uganda, in other places of the world where if we have a print collection in our library, it won't serve them at all. So we've really put aside all the work on print, or most of it, and are focusing on 4 digital, fully digital strategies. That blurs the border between serving our colleagues and staff across the world to do their job better for countries and serving people directly that do not work for our organization but that we have to respond to. And so in training, for example, we realized very early when we were going forth with this strategy in 2015-16 is that we are giving online courses to our staff across the world on how to find, discover the science and the information they need, how to interpret it, and then how to use it, how to apply it. And that goes for anybody else. So when we give a course to our country office partners or colleagues across the world, that course we also advertise it to ministries of health and others so that staff can follow it too if they need to. Of course, the difficulty is that everybody might be at different levels of literacy or information literacy. It doesn't matter. Those that might find something they need in that will follow it. And so this question of discoverability is very important, mostly in a society where we talk about push and pull of information, meaning should I go out and fetch it or scramble for it, or will it come to me directly? It's quite a dichotomy there. But what we do with what we make available is ensure that it's, for example, our institutional repository, which we call our digital multilingual library, accessible for free. People don't have to come through our platform to get the information. We've made sure that working with Google and others, it is on the high-ranking pages of any search through one of these search engines. So they don't have to come through us. It'll be pulled from our server, but how they get to it, we don't care, as long as they get to it. So without wanting to go into extended a response there, we're doing it both ways. We've got a push and a pull approach. For example, for a push approach, we have created the WHO Sustainable Development Goals newsletter. That was addressed to our staff. Again, here's the borders that are blurred. We were sending that out to 5 staff who requested it since the month of April, and that then now has 700 subscribers without us doing any marketing for it. So in 6 months, we have from 500 to 700 people receiving this newsletter. Just a few figures is that 1/3 of those 700 people are WHO staff somewhere in the world. 2/3 are non-WHO staff, are non-WHO members at all. So it's gone beyond the people we were trying to serve directly with this newsletter, where the borders are blurred, and what we do for a certain audience is now being used by different other audiences as well. So we know that 50% of these 700 people are opening it on a regular basis, and out of the people opening it, 30% of the articles in there are being used and read. I'll leave it to that for the moment, but I really think that we can serve all purposes at the same time if we go about it quite well, but that can only happen in the digital world.
Francesco or Tullio, do you have anything to follow up or add to that?
I think in the food chain of from data to wisdom, I think information is really becoming a commodity that is relatively cheap and relatively everywhere. So never mind the quantity of centers that generate information in our world. So for instance, with 5G next year and on, the centers able to produce data and therefore information will multiply by, I don't know, trillions probably. So we're already a minority as humans using internet than things. And the problem is with things that are connected, and there are more things connected than humans. This everybody know. Now with 5G, these things will start talking to one another before they get connected. They use 5G protocols to connect, and then they share that on the internet. So what will happen then, I think, then means next year, means that there is a lot of, the information becomes cheap in a way. This process, however, doesn't really touch knowledge as such. Knowledge is a product. It needs an interaction, typically with humans. In artificial intelligence, studying how this could be actually, it will take a little bit longer, but machines will produce knowledge as well. But now it's an interaction of information with us that produces that. And we know how that then produces wisdom. And it's that portion of the food chain that impacts Agenda 2030, this knowledge to wisdom. And I think there is a huge responsibility for libraries. So if print is dead, I think libraries should keep the corpse, refrigerate it. Because in the ultra future where you no longer know after a million iterations on the Google of the future whether Aristotle really wrote that sentence and which sentence preceded and which followed that sentence, I think you might have to go back to the morgue and take a look at the book, the real book. So, so this is one of the scenarios. I think that there is a responsibility, whether it's born digital or born print, for libraries to feel this responsibility, because something has changed in the last 20 years or 30 years that hadn't changed for the 4,000 years that this job was on the planet. So proceeding from that, I'm more worried about shareability of knowledge through libraries than discoverability. I think discoverability will change a lot with 5G and other protocols in a sort of liquid environment in which information is available everywhere through networks of networks. So it's not necessarily what we do as a single library that in 20 years will make it discoverable. It's what happens in other networks that lead to others. So it's a sort of hyperlinked reality that we have to look at. I think it's the shareability that makes it usable and then have an impact in reality. So what we do, for instance, I can reflect on UN libraries, what UN libraries are doing to make that knowledge more shareable And I'm massively interested in what the publishers are doing in their battle with others. I think this is one of the things that the UN, if anything, should stand for. And I think the librarians in the UN have a duty to talk to General Assembly about these things, because if we let them go, too long in the illusion that everything is going fine and nobody really needs these libraries, then it may be too late. So I'm very more worried about that than discoverability.
Okay, my microphone's not working, but I think you can all hear me. I saw Jukka and Ian.
When people can all
Yes. Okay, I've got it. Jukka and Ian both raised their hands, so let's start up here and then go back to Ian.
I'm glad to be on top, thank you. We share the concern, but when I'm listening to you, one thing comes to my mind is that I think we are talking about the upper half or the top of the information production chain here, and one of my concerns is what do we do with the lower part, the people who are not reached by libraries at all, and who do lack many basic literacy skills to be fully competent in our society. And I just had a word with Finnish representatives from the PR or PA section, both Nokia and Microsoft. They said that they have difficulties in recruiting people. That there are all kinds of restrictions. They can't import all the experts they would need, and Finnish government is trying to limit the amount of people moving in because there's unemployment in the country. But the unemployed people in Finland do not have those skills which are needed to develop systems within Nokia or Microsoft. And this group of people is increasing, who are excluded from the information society. And I think one of the big questions for public libraries is how to include more people, how to reach for the people, and how to provide opportunities to pick up those skills which are required to be fully competent in this contemporary society. And a very good example were the political elections, parliament elections in Finland 2011. I remember when my friends, politically active friends, youthful, very literate, highly academically educated friends were very enthusiastic about the emerging social media, that this is a new tool for democracy, and so forth. It was, but on an entirely different way they thought. They thought the world would be a liberal, greenish paradise, as people have new means of communication. What happened is that when the whole population got into the social media, it became socially acceptable to be a racist, because the racists found one another in the social media. All kinds of things came up which we hadn't seen in our society for decades. The nationalism, populism, different right-wing phenomenon started spreading along the same channels. And I think part of that is that people with not sufficient skills to be in the social media, which was based in light discussion and with lots of self-reflective irony and joking and playing with words and so forth. And then you come to this kind of atmosphere, and you don't feel this is the language you speak. People started getting more aggressive when kind of these two cultures met in the social media, and this was part of one of the factors, one of the reasons behind the big, remarkable rise of national populism. I mean, the National Populist Party got up from 5% to 20% in a year, And that was precisely the same year the social media penetration reached the whole population. So I think there are some psychological skills also required, because we are talking about the use of the symbols, ability to communicate using the symbols without feeling threatened, without feeling that people think you're clever enough and so forth. So I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, which can't be done on the top level of the information production chain, which is of course very important, and I'm standing very, very strongly for the, for autonomy of universities and different things needed to do quality academic research. I mean, our civilization is based on that, and of course it is very, very important what you're doing, opening the gates to third world countries to access the information we have. And make it possible to read the bloody expensive scientific periodicals, which Elsevier is pricing sky high. Yeah, that's important. But we have to think about the kind of the everyday side of this, and there's a lot to be done in our own societies as well.
Yeah, I agree that the morgue sounds a bit dark. When I did mention that for WHO print is dead, I did mean WHO, and that brings me to what you both responded, which is the context in which we're talking about. For WHO, it made little sense to retain print. We're an international organization working 24/7 in various regions. We needed to jump on the online wagon. That said, it depends on your audience. Community libraries are absolutely necessary, of course, with print, obviously, for people that don't have the reach to digital media, for instance. But for WHO, it was really very important to make a choice where all our energies and resources would be focused to get the best benefit out of it. And also, we do have a lot of materials that are legacy print from 1948, because the organization is 70 years of age, therefore very mature, and we do not abandon that. That is transformed, digitized, of course, so that then it can live a new life in a digital era. Talking about access, there were two words that were mentioned, shareability and interoperability. I think those are really two very big, important keywords. The shareability is the rights aspect. First of all, how do you get to it, and then are you allowed to use it, is a very important aspect. And we know very well that there are a lot of barriers because of copyright and the slow process of open access right now. That is a barrier. And WHO is working on one aspect of that. That is not the solution for the world, but does bring a solution for a few people. Then the second word is interoperability, which again is the technologies here are very important. You can't share information in 20 years' time if it's not interoperable with all the different technologies that will be available. So we're making sure that we remain at the forefront of using standards for interoperability so that we can switch from one system to another and keep on sharing what it is we do. But people are not reached, and that's why in 2002 WHO Library was a pioneer in setting up a public-private partnership with the major publishers that had skyrocket prices for print and online resources. So this was called Hinari, and still is called Hinari, and provides close to 20,000 online journal titles in the health area to 115 poor countries, 50,000 e-books and textbooks, as well as access for free to major databases without the barrier cost. Now, the beauty of this is that the poorest countries in the world are richer than the richest as far as health information is concerned. No English, French, American university, government, or even pharmaceutical industry could purchase this mass of information. It would cost them more than 25 million a year. So the poorest countries in the world have access and are on par and empowered by this research that is available to them suddenly from one day to the next. digital is not the only solution. There are a lot of areas in the world, in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's no access, but we know that it's growing, and we know that they're jumping straight to mobility with mobile devices, for instance. And finally, just one little story to give you some context. In 2002, when Hinari was launched, there was the Kathmandu Hospital in Nepal that suddenly heard about this a few years later, and in 2005 or 2006 registered for free access to Hinari. They suddenly had thousands of journals that were invisible to them because of the cost of barrier cost. And one of the doctors, Dr. Neopan over there, started using access to this massive information and told his colleagues about it. Not only were they able to increase the level of care in their neonatal services and other services, decrease mortality as well, they were able to carry out their own research and write their own articles in that hospital's journal that suddenly reached such a level of quality in their output as well that it is now referenced in PubMed, which is the largest international health literature resource. So it just shows that it can serve multiple purposes. And one call here is also for us, as we're thinking on providing shared information or providing access to information, we need to find ways to really up our game in finding what type of impact do we have on people's lives. We've got lots of numbers. I could say that Hinari is worth 25 million downloads per year for free through this partnership, but that's not impact, that's output. So we need to find ways to measure the impact so that when people are talking of the 17 goals of SDGs and say, have you reached 50% of increased or decreased mortality in less than 5-year-old children? That's figures that they can come up with. And if they were asked, as far as knowledge conveyors, what is your impact on people's health, on people's economy, on people's education, we really need to find something that speaks very loudly for us. And as you very rightly said, Jukka, libraries are actually the only real conveyors of free information and free knowledge that can help on most of the SDGs. Conveying how we do that on a daily basis is a different story, or how successful we are.
I think that's a really good point, and I think in general libraries and our profession, we do get a little bit hung up on statistics and numbers, but I think having real examples, concrete examples that people can relate to, that really resonate, that's going to be really important moving forward. I wanted to end with, if there are any comments on this. It would be interesting to hear what people have to say. Since we're here courtesy of AILIS and CERN, AILIS being a library association, and then Tulio, you're here representing BIS. I'm just wondering, what do you think the role of library associations is to bring the different different types of libraries together? I think to come together to create local, national, international initiatives to push these projects forward, to make them more visible, to reach people. I know it's a really grand question, but we work so differently. Before I came to Geneva and worked at ITU, I worked in public libraries, and it's a completely different world. But I think our goals are the same, and I think we can really complement each other in a lot of ways. So as library associations, excuse me, we're really, our role is to enable our members who are libraries and librarians to achieve success. So what can we do? What can we do to contribute to the success of the agenda and the SDGs. Maybe Tullio, you want to say something?
Yeah, this helps me to say a few words about what I was asked to provide in terms of information by the Swiss Library Association. Because exactly what you're saying, so to say, finds its implementation, so to say, in the project Biblio 2030, which is a joined Swiss, Austrian, German, and South Tyrolean initiative. So it's an association that started with a meeting called by IFLA in Holland, where BIS was represented, which is the Association of Swiss Libraries, and where they engaged together with the SAB, which is the other Swiss organization that represents the public libraries in Switzerland, and Bibliomedia, which is another public right foundation that, so to say, supports and promotes reading in Switzerland. So these organizations engaged in, so to say, decide a strategy to implement the principles of the Agenda 2030 in Switzerland. And among others, one of the key points in this project was to engage associations at the local level in Switzerland and in all those countries, the so-called DACHs, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and South Tyrol. So this is one of the key points for them, is raising the awareness, first of all, of the library workers about the importance of the contribution of libraries to the Agenda 2030, and then engaging library associations at all levels. So AILIS could also play a role in this framework, in this context. So one thing that, so to say, has postponed somehow the kick-off, the starting point of this initiative in a more concrete sense is the fact that now, as you maybe know, if you don't know, I'm going to tell, BIS and SAB, so these two library associations that still exist in Switzerland, are now in the process of merging. So they will be merging next year in a meeting that is going to take place, I think, in March in Bienne, in Biel. So for the time being, they postponed the start of this Biblio 2030 initiative to next year. And also, by the way, they are trying to identify possible sources for financing of the different initiatives. So one of the key points in this project of Biblio 2030 is also the keywords community. So they identified as one of the main axes of activity, of work for them, the keyword community creation. So this, so to say, social aspect and the social impact of libraries, public libraries, and not only. In this context, if I can move away from the Swiss context to a more, so to say, CERN-related context, one of the key questions for an institution like CERN, who is doing basic research, which is by definition research that does not have and should not have an immediate application, is what are we doing here? What is our purpose? What is our role? Is exactly the key point of the impact. What is the impact? Now, evidently, a basic research should not have an immediate impact, but there is also a long-term impact on society, which heavily depends on awareness at the social level about the importance of science, but also the importance of scientific development and diffusion of scientific knowledge that in this long term has an impact on the well-being of a society. Okay? Without basic research, there is no application. Without application, there is no progress, scientific, economic, and so on in the society. This is one of the key, so to say, effort of an organization like CERN when talking about what we are doing for society. I think it's important because we are talking about several kinds of literacy, but the awareness, the social awareness about the importance of science, in all sense, not necessarily particle physics, is something that is important. It's also the base for the development of a society. Okay. Thanks.
That's pretty conclusive.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything to add? Lise?
There has been a discussion and that has been taking place at our organization, so the World Intellectual Property Organization, for many years about the exceptions and limitations for libraries, research institutions, archives. And it's basically those institutions versus the publishers who are where the kind of the conflicts taking place, in the sense library associations can band together and share their views and lobby the delegates in the copyright and intellectual property offices, those same delegates who then attend our meetings and who would understand and truly represent the needs of those institutions in why exceptions and limitations are important. And then if those institutions could finally have the those exceptions and limitations written into their laws, because it has to happen at national level, because copyright is a national issue, then they can do their jobs and then help the SDGs. So library associations can do a lot, and we're stronger together than we are as individually. So, thanks.
Oh, yes. Okay, yes. Go ahead, Jukka.
I have an anecdote about the work library associations are doing in WIPO, because I was in IFLA conference, and there's a annual ritual. There's a president's lunch. IFLA president's giving lunch to important stakeholders and friendly organizations, and I was there. And then suddenly the advocacy officer of IFLA approached me and said, "Jukka, now there's a copyright holder organization approaching WIPO. Go and sit between them." I did. We had a wonderful discussion. Yeah. About library association, I would like to just provide one very, very brief definition. I mean, I've been thinking about a lot because of being president for 8 years of a library association. I've been thinking, what is this organization? What is the purpose? And I think the most important thing about library associations is that all the librarians, they are civil servants. They work either for the municipalities or for the government. So there's a limitation how much they can criticize the government. But library associations do not have that limitation. So library association is free to evaluate the politics either done or planned. They can comment everything, and librarians are free to express themselves through the library association. So that's how library associations are the voice of the libraries, or the voice of the librarians. And I think that's the most important role. Of course, we are the voice of library users as well. And we have 100 million of them in Europe. There's a big amount of people. And somebody has to speak for them, because they are very fond of their libraries.
Okay. I think we'll wrap up now. I think we ended on two sort of powerful points. Together we're stronger, and also library associations, we need to look to them as our voice, as the vehicle for conveying our thoughts, our concerns, our I think wishes as well for more more information literacy, a stronger information society to our governments. And I want to thank Francesco and Ian for coming and for talking about what WHO and UNOG are doing. I think that they were some really inspiring and powerful examples. In particular, I think Research for Life and everything that's going on there is such an amazing collaboration between public and private, and being able to really it really, to me, embodies what we are trying to do as librarians, as information professionals, and take the information, get it to the people who need it, and remove barriers, and provide access. So thank you everybody for coming. Tulio,
Last word, 10 minutes. So the next season, Live Science Talks is in preparation. We already have topics and speakers. We are contacting them now. So we are in the process of defining all the dates and the speakers and the topics. So you'll be soon informed about that. So please come to next year. It's going to be, we have a bunch of very interesting guys coming here to talk about interesting topics. Okay, thank you.